What are your thoughts on Bart Ehrman's books? Because I know you have good things to say about forgery and Jesus Interrupted and misquoting Jesus and stuff like that. But the problem was with Did Jesus Exist? That book, and your thoughts on the debate you recently had. Was it in October 2016?
I think.
Yeah. Okay. October 2016. It's on the internet. It's Bart Ehrman versus Robert M. Price. Did Jesus Exist? So if you want to look that up on YouTube or on Bart Ehrman's blog or whatever. So yeah, your thoughts on Bart Ehrman? Are you still in contact with them? Would you do another debate with them? Would you work with them again? And all right, that's right. Bob is writing a book called Bart Ehrman Interpreted. That's coming out in April this year, and it's already on Amazon for pre-order. So I highly recommend it. I'm looking forward to it. So your thoughts on Bart Ehrman?
Well, I like him very much. We're friends, and he's a fine guy. He, like me, began his biblical study as an evangelical, a conservative, and gradually found himself unable to affirm that anymore, a very similar path. But I have the impression, and I am no mind reader, it's just an impression that he is still thinking inside the box of evangelical apologetics. His mentor, the great Bruce Metzger, who I had the privilege of having a class with at Princeton, they're both textual critics, Bart and Metzger, and Metzger was also something of an apologist and wrote an article where he gives the standard account that the other dying and rising gods were post-Jesus, which is demonstrably not the case, but it was the standard apologetic line. And it seems to me that some of these elements linger in Bart's work, certain axioms of conservative traditional scholarship, such as the idea that Paul at least wrote the lucky 7 epistles, as I call them, that he wrote 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Romans, Galatians, 1st Thessalonians, Philemon, Philippians. And to my satisfaction, F.C. Bauer, back in the 19th century, demonstrated that Paul couldn't have written any more than 1st and 2nd Corinthians, most of Romans, and Galatians. So even Bultmann, supposedly so critical, backslid to the 7 after Bauer argued it was 4. But I also find convincing the Dutch radical scholars like W.C. van Manen, who argued that Paul, if you use the same criteria, you can show that Paul couldn't have written even the 4 Hauptbriefe, the 4 principal epistles. And this is just not on Bart's radar. I was in the Westar Institute's Paul seminar, and my mentor and colleague Darrell Dowdy and I were talking about this Dutch radical thing. Even the supposedly super critical Jesus seminar people practically laughed us out of the room. And it's just so alien, because Protestant theology of all stripes really depends on Paul more than Jesus. So Paul is the sacred ark of the covenant, and anybody that dares touch it winds up in the ditch like Uzzah in 2 Samuel. So I found it difficult to debate with Bart because there is so little common ground. I'm operating in a totally different paradigm. Like he actually started laughing when I said Paul didn't write Galatians, though this is an old view. Rudolf Steck, the teacher of Karl Barth, believed this. And it's been argued a long time, but it's just shoved out of consideration in any seminaries or grad schools. He readily dismisses the Christ myth theory because he lumps all of the mythicist scholars together and picks out things that he thinks are demonstrably false without, I think, adequately taking it into consideration. Like, I had the impression he hadn't really read the books, mine, Earl Doherty's, Brody's, various others, Frank Zindler, because he didn't seem to be acquainted with enough of it to be able to address it. My opening statement in that debate was a response point by point to his major argument in Did Jesus Exist? And yet he didn't address some of my criticisms, such as that his approach is often circular. He'll say that a typical evangelical apologetic, there wouldn't have been enough time between Jesus and the Gospels for Jesus to become mythicized. And it seems obvious to me that applies. I think it's wrong anyway, but the apologists that say that mean that, well, of course there was a historical Jesus, but he couldn't have been embellished into a miracle worker in the brief time, several decades, between Jesus and the writing of the Gospels. That's not the point in our debate. The question is, was there a historical Jesus at the beginning of Christianity? And if you say no, Jesus is a sort of distillation of various mystery cult myths and so on, when do you even say it started? There's no birth date of an individual. If the whole thing is mythical, it makes no sense to say, well, from the starting point to the Gospels, not enough time. What's the starting point? The Osiris cult? It's just like, well, at any rate, he has certain ideas like no one would make up the notion of a crucified Messiah. It must have been something forced on the Christians. Their Messiah, Jesus, was crucified. Whoops. What sense can we make of this? Well, maybe it was a redemptive death. But this was unheard of in Jewish Messianism, Bart and apologists say. I think it is not at all, because Jewish Messianism comes from the sacred king mythology in ancient Israel that is on display throughout the Old Testament. And the king was the Son of God, or the God incarnate, the vicar of God on earth. And he underwent ritual humiliation, a symbolic death and resurrection every year, as the kings of Babylon and Canaan city-states did, to renew the vegetation. So the idea of a messianic divine king suffering, dying, and rising to redeem the world, this is a very ancient idea. It wasn't something early Christians cooked up. And this I know from reading a bunch of the Scandinavian myth and ritual scholars, Mowinckel, Gunkel, Engnell, Geo Wiedengren, but I don't see any airplay of that stuff in Did Jesus Exist? So it just seems to me he's within an apologetic box still, and that's easy to understand, but I think that if you consider a wider range of sources and get rid of this circularity and the consensus fallacy, I think that is to be found all over the place in his work. Unfortunately, perhaps I'm misunderstanding it, but most people seem to think so. That he says, well, look, most scholars think this is wrong. The consensus of scholars, all the in crowd at the Society of Biblical Literature, the consensus of scholars is that there was a historical Jesus. If you don't think so, you must be a nut, a conspiracy theorist, 9/11 truther, Holocaust denier, all this stuff. Well, I always like to say, the consensus of scholars in the Gospels was that Jesus should be put to death. Were they right? You can't take a nose count, as Francis Schaeffer used to say. It really does not matter epistemologically what most people think. I mean, was the earth flat when most people thought so? And this is what happens in the succession of paradigms in science, in literary studies, in history. You have a paradigm, a framework for interpreting the evidence. And if you can make sense of the evidence, but there's always data that doesn't quite fit, and so eventually someone will start with that data, construct a new framework, a new way to interpret the data, and if it's cogent, gradually everybody will come around to it. But it's going to be a tough fight, as it should be, because you've really got to prove your point. It's not easy. So there's whenever a new paradigm replaces an old one, as in Old Testament minimalism, it's going to be a long fight, but the minority view may become the majority view. I won't live long enough to see that happen, and I don't really care if it happens. I'm not part of some Jesus mythicist sect. I don't care. It's just a theory that makes the most sense to me.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, see, I like Bart Ehrman's books, Forged and stuff like that. But
oh yeah, he's done some goodies.
Yeah, okay, so can you briefly give us your criticism of Did Jesus Exist? Because you and Richard Carrier said that book sucks. So. Yeah.
Well, despite there's the differences I just outlined, which are more in basic principle, but it does seem to me that he does not accurately represent the views of myself and Earl Doherty, who's written some great stuff on this, Acharya S., Dorothy Murdoch. I've written a real damning critique of her, but she's changed her stripes since then and took the criticisms to heart and has written much better stuff. But he blasts us and assumes we're sort of like the old parable of the laundrymen who make their living doing each other's wash. He doesn't distinguish sufficiently between the very different approaches that some of us take, and he doesn't seem to get what we're saying. And I don't know why that is. Like he says that I use the criteria of dissimilarity to show that Jesus most likely didn't say this or that. He says, well, the criterion of dissimilarity is aimed at finding what Jesus did say, not what he didn't. It's really two ways of saying the same thing, and I was amazed. He inferred that, and he claims that this very strange statue in the Vatican that Acharya mentions is sort of an odd thing that shows weird things were going on back then in religion that had just been ignored. He says she made this up. Well, she didn't, and she documented it and so on. And Earl Doherty, he doesn't get Earl's point, which is pretty clear, I think. So my guess is that his research assistants failed him. Many faculty at highfalutin schools have research assistants, which is how you can do so many books. Like Bart really churns them out, and they're like the forgery and counter-forgery, exhaustive in its treatment. Jesus Before the Gospels does all kinds of stuff with oral tradition theories. Great research, really good stuff. My favorite is books, The Orthodox Corruption of Scriptures, based on a whole lot of research, and that's not shameful. I mean, you have these Santa's elves working for you, doing research you don't have time to do. They just say, okay, here's some relevant stuff we've culled, and Joachim Jeremias did that. A lot of scholars do that. There's nothing discreditable about that, but so my criticism is more of his research assistants who rounded up material they thought he should read to critique, but it wasn't enough stuff. It wasn't in context, and I think it misrepresents us. But not in everything he says, of course, but that's the impression I was left with. I was sort of astonished.
Oh, okay.
He's so brilliant and does so many great books. This just did not seem to me to be an adequate treatment. I hope he does another book on mythicism and does a more comprehensive criticism of it.
Do you think he has an emotional stake in it because on Jesus Exists? Because most of his work and his career revolve around historical Jesus. So do you think he has like an emotional investment in the history of Jesus and things like that?
Yeah. Like, for instance, Gerd Ludemann got into considerable trouble for his critical work on Jesus, though he does believe there was a historical Jesus. But I know for a fact he had a kind of nostalgic, sentimental attachment to the gospel Jesus. And even though he's kind of agnostic, he still kind of wishes there was this canonical Jesus. Well, it might be that Bart feels that way, but I doubt it. I think he's pretty much resigned himself to agnosticism and atheism. But the historical Jesus thing, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, I think it's just very difficult for him to even entertain that as a plausible thing. And I think my guess, like, I'm no mind reader, but I wonder if it's what Peter Berger calls a plausibility structure. What seems plausible to your peer group automatically seems plausible to you, or you start looking for another peer group. And Bart defines professional New Testament scholarship as a guild of people that reject the Christ myth theory. I mean, many other things too, but for him, it's automatically fringe crackpot scholarship, and so he cannot, because everybody thinks so. He knows that if he were to espouse this, his colleagues say, what's happened to you? You know, what you having a breakdown or something? And I don't think he consciously figures, I don't dare take this seriously or I'm out of a job. I really don't think that. But I suspect it's the plausibility structure thing. Well, I know that's not sound scholarship. Why bother with it? And it's just an disinclination to think out of the box. I have respect for him, so I don't attribute any kind of neurotic or disingenuous motives. I really don't.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, and I know I sound like I'm undermining him, trying to psychoanalyze him. I'm not. It's just that I respect him so much. I need to come up with some explanation as to why I think he's wrong on this. But that's all it is. It's just my guess and understanding.
It's just a scholarly disagreement on things.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's a surprising one. So I wonder, well, how'd that happen? But that's really the only status of what I'm saying. I certainly don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I get along with him, you get along with him, yeah, so it's just, we can have our disagreements.
Well, I tell you what it's kind of like is my political disagreement, where there are loads of people I love and respect that voted for a candidate that I cannot imagine voting for. It utterly mystifies me. But they're intelligent people, so I said, well, who cares, really?
Yeah, we're going to talk about politics in a little bit. Okay, so is there